Greetings, viewers. It is I, Blazing Larvesta. So, Ace Attorney, easily one of my favorite game franchises of all time. As of 2024, the Ace Attorney series has 11 games, 2 anime seasons, 2 manga adaptations, and a gargantuan roster of characters. With that in mind, though this goes without saying, there will be spoilers for the pre-time skip era of the Ace Attorney games. These games may be old, but at the very least, I know many of you are going to be experiencing the Ace Attorney Investigations games for the first time this year, especially Prosecutor's Gambit. Ergo, if you want to go in as blind as possible, I suggest not watching this video. Anyways, of the characters to grace the Ace Attorney franchise, one of the most impactful on the series, for as little as he appears, is the main villain of the first game, Manfred von Karma. A terror among those in the legal system, Manfred von Karma was a ruthless prosecutor with ambitions of perfection, a pursuit that had seen him undefeated for a whopping 40 years until he was brought to justice at the end of the first game. Someone of his stature would undoubtedly be a very wealthy man, but just how rich are we talking? Well, in this video, I'm going to run through some quick math and find out just how wealthy Manfred von Karma was prior to his incarceration. Before we get into Manfred's history, let's go over some ground rules as well as how I'm going to do my math. For the sake of this video, I will only be looking at the timeline used in the games, specifically the Phoenix Wright trilogy and the Investigations duology. I will not be factoring the anime or manga into account, which means I won't be going over stuff like Von Karma's mansion or Edgeworth's pet dog, so don't be blinded by the anime's illusions. Missile does not exist. As far as determining this time frame the series takes place in, the first Ace Attorney game states that the DL6 incident took place on December 28, 2001. As it takes place 15 years after the incident, this places the first game, and by extension Von Karma's downfall, in 2016. I will do calculations starting when Manfred begins his career as a prosecutor up until his incarceration, giving him a Los Angeles prosecutor salary each year. While I couldn't find exact results on how much taxes would be in Los Angeles each year, the numbers I did find generally hovered around 9%, which is what I'll use. Considering how wealthy Von Karma appears to be, I'll then have him put away 60% of what he earns, with 6% interest each year into his bank account, with his PIN set as 0001 because, of course, he is number one. His words, not mine. To get ahead for a moment, I also want to bring up Manfred's family tree. We know Manfred was married and had at least 2 biological children, the older having a daughter of their own. Additionally, while the games don't make it explicit whether or not Manfred adopted Miles or merely took him in to mentor as a prosecutor, there is enough evidence that I feel safe saying Manfred adopted Miles Edgeworth outright. With this in mind, I'm going to assume Manfred spent a certain amount of his savings on his children each year until they turned 18, with Franziska and her older sibling getting $10,000 each, and Miles, being the son of Von Karma's nemesis, getting a smaller but still high $5,000. I won't have Manfred be paying for their education or any foreign travel, which I'll get into later in the video. With all that background out of the way, we can begin with the timeline proper. Manfred von Karma was born in 1951, where he was raised by his strict parents under the mantra of demanding perfection in everything he does. Well, that or he came up with that twisted mindset himself. Regardless, Manfred would study law to become an international prosecutor, beginning his career in 1976 at the age of 25, though he would focus his practices in the city of Los Angeles, California. Before I get into the start of Manfred's paycheck, I'm also going to assume Manfred had a starting cash value he inherited from his parents. While his starting value could theoretically be any amount, I'll have him inherit $20,000 from his parents in 1976. Prosecutors in Los Angeles can make anywhere from around $99,500 to $134,000 in 2024. Given Manfred's high prestige, I'll give him a salary equivalent to $130,000 in 2024. However, this is what he would be making today. I'll be adjusting Manfred's salary back for inflation to what it would have been each year to get a more accurate number. Given when college semesters typically end in the United States, I'll also assume Manfred began his prosecuting career in the middle of the year, around June to early September. Because of this, I'll have Manfred's salary for the year be half of what he would have made. From here, we can fast forward all the way to 1988, which is the year I'll say Manfred got married. By this point, Manfred's total for the end of the year would be $293,780.74. Weddings in Los Angeles typically range anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 today. I'll estimate Manfred leaned closer to the higher end and say he paid close to $40,000 today, which in 1988 would be around $15,100, putting Manfred at around $278,680.74 in his bank account. The following year, 1989, is when I estimate Manfred's first child will be born, who I'll call Victor von Karma for the sake of this video. For the record, I'm not pulling this year completely out of thin air. It's the same age gap between the Faith sisters Mia and Maya, the latter of which confirming that she and Franziska are the same age. With this in mind, I believe a similar parallel between Mia Fey and Victor von Karma could be drawn as well. As stated earlier, this will also be the year I have Manfred start putting a portion of his savings into raising his children. At the end of the year, Manfred has $297,776.33. 10 years later, 1999, is the year Manfred's second child would be born, the fool-whipping, no-nonsense Franziska von Karma. Just like what it did for Victor, I'll have Manfred start paying $10,000 into raising Franziska each year. Coming out of 1999, Manfred then had $540,229.51. The end of the following year, 2000, would see the case that would become known as the IS-7 incident unfold, which Manfred would handle. In Christmas of that year, Manfred would meet defense attorney Gregory Edgeworth, who would debate the case against Manfred for an entire year until Manfred got another win by blackmailing the defendant into confessing as an accomplice. However, during the trial, Manfred would be found to have used a falsified autopsy report, which would result in the only penalty he received in his entire career. That day, an earthquake would strike the courtroom, which would lead to easily the darkest day in von Karma's life. Manfred would be shot in the shoulder by a stray bullet that flew out of an elevator. Still reeling in shock from his earlier penalty, Manfred would see the unconscious bodies of Gregory Edgeworth, his son Miles, and a court bailiff all slumped down while a handgun was lying on the ground. Picking up the gun, Manfred shot Gregory in the heart. At the time of DL6, Manfred had an estimated $581,456.12 in his bank account. Okay, theatrics out of the way, Manfred would take a 6-month-long vacation from work to heal from his bullet wound. I won't have him paying for a hospital bill from the wound, given that he didn't get surgery to avoid being a witness, but what I will do is cut his yearly salary in half again, like what I did in 1976. Though this would also be the year Manfred adopted Miles, I won't have Manfred start spending on him until the next year due to how many corners he had to cut as is. At the end of 2002, Manfred had $581,797.39 in his bank account. So, yeah, not a big increase from last time. From here on out, we can quickly summarize the next decade and a half of Manfred's life. For starters, in 2007, Victor von Karma would come of age, so Manfred would stop supporting him financially that year. I'll also have that be the year Victor becomes a prosecutor. Given the von Karma family values, I'm fairly certain Manfred raised him to become a prosecutor just as his other students. And I also don't think 18 is too unreasonable of an age for Victor to start his career, given how young Franziska was when she started prosecuting. 2 years later, in 2009, Victor's daughter would be born. I won't have Manfred be spending on his granddaughter, as by this point, Victor should be able to support her independently. 2010 is the year Miles Edgeworth comes of age, and 2012 would be the year Franziska and Miles officially become prosecutors. Miles' career would get off to a rough start, as his first 2 cases would not reach a verdict due to the defendants dying before one could be reached. Oh, if he had a nickel. Franziska, on the other hand, would travel to Germany to begin her prosecuting career following the trial of the second KG-8 incident. As I stated earlier, though, Manfred will not be charged for this, as his old friend, Ernest Amano, was credited by Miles for paying for his foreign travel, which I imagine applied to Franziska as well. That said, this would still be an important year for Manfred's finances, as now Franziska has a means of income of her own. Prosecutors in Germany generally have a salary of around 65,000 to 119,000 euros. Despite being a newcomer to the prosecuting scene, I feel like Franziska would be competent enough to warrant a higher salary, so I'll go on the higher end and give her the equivalent of 105,000 euros each year, which translates to $114,150.75 in the United States. While she is a very capable prosecutor all her own, at the same time, Franziska is also a minor. Because of this, I'll be adding 55% of her salary to Manfred's final total. I won't be considering taxes into this equation, as I don't think Franziska would be worrying about that at her age. On another note, I'll also have 2012 be the year Miles gets his car, a 1996 Alfa Romeo GTV, which new, I estimate, would have costed around $18,873.82. I'll have von Karma just make the down payment, which would be 20% of the car's worth, or $3,774.76, and have Miles make the remaining payments until the car is fully paid off. At the end of 2012, Manfred had $923,400 $46.52. Nothing major happens to Von Karma over the next 2 years, so I'll jump ahead to the DL6 incident's 15-year anniversary, where budding defense attorney Phoenix Wright defends Miles Edgeworth for the murder of Robert Hammond, cross-examines a parrot, and points to Manfred von Karma as the true culprit of the murder, sentencing him to prison for DL6. And that's where I'll end my calculations, right before the resolution of the DL6 incident. On December 28, 2016, just before DL6's conclusion, Manfred had $1,307,904.45 in his bank account, which in 2024 would be the equivalent of $1,712,078.73. All things considered, I think Manfred being a millionaire by 2016 makes perfect sense for the guy, knowing what we know about him. I'll admit, I had to make a lot more estimations than I would have liked, owing to how little we know of people like Francisco's older sibling and their daughter, but I'd say this is the best guess I could come up with. Still, what do you guys think? Did I get anything wrong or mess up any of my calculations? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyways, thank you all for watching. This has been Blazing Larvesta, signing out.